Those can't be real. The words cut through the courtroom like a blade. Judge Richard Morrison leaned forward, his expensive suit pressing against the polished bench as he stared at the old man standing before him. James Parker, 84 years old, stood perfectly still. 3 rows of ribbons covered his worn denim jacket. A single star-shaped medal hung from a pale blue ribbon over his heart. "I asked you a question, sir." The judge's voice rose with practiced authority. "Where did you buy those medals? Some surplus store?" The small gallery shifted uncomfortably. A few nervous laughs echoed from the back. James said nothing. His gray eyes, clear as winter sky, remained fixed on the flag behind the bench. He wasn't angry. He wasn't afraid. He seemed to be somewhere else entirely. "Take the jacket off." The judge's command landed like a hammer. "That display is a mockery of real heroes." The bailiff stepped forward, hesitant. James's hands, gnarled with age, rested calmly at his sides. Beneath the faded denim, something else rested too. A truth that would soon detonate this courtroom. Before we continue, if you've ever been underestimated because of your appearance, type respect below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story of James Parker proves that true honor doesn't demand recognition. It earns it through quiet dignity. I read every comment. 3 hours earlier, James had been riding his motorcycle down County Road 47. The morning sun warmed his back as he headed to the hardware store. He'd needed supplies to fix his neighbor's fence. At 84, most men would have hired someone. James did it himself. The traffic stop had been routine. A young deputy, fresh-faced and polite, had pulled him over for a broken tail light. "Sir, I need to see your license and registration." James handed them over without comment. The deputy noticed the jacket. His eyes lingered on the medals for a moment, something shifting in his expression. But he said nothing, just wrote the citation and sent James on his way with a respectful nod. The real trouble started when James arrived at the courthouse to contest the ticket. He'd been riding with that taillight for weeks, unaware it was out. He wanted to explain, to pay the fine, to move on with his day. Judge Morrison had other plans. "Mr. Parker," the judge began, shuffling papers without looking up. "You're here regarding citation number." He finally glanced up. His eyes locked on the jacket. His entire demeanor changed. The boredom vanished, replaced by something sharper, disdain mixed with cruel amusement. "Well, well, what do we have here?" Morrison's voice dripped with mockery. "A decorated hero, I see. Tell me, Mr. Parker, do you wear that jacket everywhere? To the grocery store? The gas station?" He leaned back in his chair, enjoying himself. "Let me guess. You like the attention, the free coffee, the thank you for your service routine." James's public defender, a young woman named Rebecca Chen, stood up. "Your Honor, my client is here for a simple traffic violation. His military service is irrelevant." "Counselor." Morrison cut her off with a wave. "What is relevant is the spectacle he's making of himself in my courtroom." He pointed at the medals. "Those decorations. I've seen men like him before. Stolen valor. It's disgusting." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Rebecca's face flushed red. "Your Honor, that's an outrageous accusation. You have no basis." "I have eyes, Counselor, and common sense." Morrison stood, towering over his bench like a king on a throne. "Do you know how many real veterans I see come through here? Men who served honorably. They don't parade around like peacocks. They don't need constant validation." He turned his gaze back to James. "Real heroes are humble. They don't wear their service on their sleeve, or in this case, on their entire chest." James remained silent. His breathing was steady, measured. His shoulders stayed squared, his spine straight, an unconscious military bearing that decades of civilian life had never erased. What Judge Morrison didn't know, what he couldn't possibly understand, was that James Parker had earned the right to remain silent. He'd earned it in rice paddies and jungle clearings. He'd earned it while carrying wounded men through machine gun fire. He'd earned it in a place where silence meant survival and noise meant death. "I'm going to ask you one more time, Mr. Parker." Morrison's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Where did you get those medals?" "They were given to me," James said quietly. His voice was soft but carried surprising weight, each word precisely chosen. "Economically delivered." "Given to you by whom? The costume shop manager?" Morrison laughed at his own joke. Several people in the gallery joined in, emboldened by the judge's cruelty. "Let me tell you something about respect, old man. You don't get it by pinning tin to your jacket. You earn it through honest work, through integrity, not through some fantasy you've concocted about being a war hero." Rebecca stepped forward, her hands trembling with barely contained rage. "Your Honor, I must object. You're making unfounded accusations against my client without any evidence. This is completely inappropriate." "Inappropriate?" Morrison's eyebrows shot up. "I'll tell you what's inappropriate, counselor. It's inappropriate for this man to stand in a court of law, a place that represents truth and justice, wearing fraudulent decorations. It's an insult to every person who ever served this country with honor." The bailiff, a middle-aged man named Tom Rodriguez, shifted his weight uncomfortably. He'd served in the Gulf War, 12 years in the Army. Something about this felt wrong, dead wrong. The old man's posture, the way he held himself, the calm in his eyes. Tom had seen that before, in real soldiers, in men who'd actually been there. But it wasn't his place to intervene. Judge Morrison ran this courtroom with an iron fist. Tom had seen him destroy people for far less than speaking out of turn. In the gallery, a local reporter named Sarah Mitchell was taking notes. She'd come to cover a zoning dispute scheduled after this case. But this was something else. She pulled out her phone discreetly, opening her voice recorder app. This felt like a story. Morrison wasn't finished. "You know what I think, Mr. Parker? I think you're a lonely old man desperate for attention. I think you found that jacket at a thrift store and decided to play dress-up. And I think it's pathetic." Each word was a calculated strike. James absorbed them like body blows, never flinching, never reacting. His gray eyes remained steady, fixed on a point somewhere beyond the judge's shoulder. Rebecca tried again. "Your Honor, I request a recess. This is not—" "Request denied." Morrison silenced her with a look. "In fact, I'm adding a charge of contempt of court. Your client's refusal to answer my questions directly shows a clear disrespect for this court's authority." "He did answer your question." Rebecca's voice cracked with frustration. "Not to my satisfaction." Morrison's smile was cruel. "And here's what's going to happen. Mr. Parker is going to remove that jacket right now in front of this court. Or I'm going to hold him in contempt and remand him into custody." The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop. Even the casual observers sensed they were witnessing something terrible. Tom Rodriguez's hand moved to his radio. He didn't know why. Instinct, maybe. A sense that this was about to go somewhere very bad. James looked down at his jacket. His fingers, rough and scarred, moved to the top button. For a moment, it seemed he might actually comply. Then he stopped. His hand fell back to his side. "No," he said simply. Morrison's face turned red. "What did you say?" "No, Your Honor. I won't remove my jacket." The judge stood fully, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Then you leave me no choice. Bailiff, take him into custody. I'm ordering a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Clearly, this man is not in his right mind." Tom Rodriguez felt his stomach drop. A psychiatric hold for refusing to take off a jacket. This was beyond wrong. But he moved forward anyway, reaching for his handcuffs. Rebecca grabbed her phone. Her hands shook as she unlocked the screen. She didn't know what she was looking for, didn't have a plan. She just knew she had to do something. That's when she noticed it. On James's collar, nearly hidden by the jacket's fold, was a small pin. She'd missed it before, a castle tower with an eagle. She zoomed in with her camera, took a quick photo, then pulled up Google. Her search results made her heart stop. First Special Forces Group, the Green Berets. Rebecca's mind raced. Special Forces. That changed everything. She looked up from her phone to see Tom Rodriguez standing behind James, handcuffs in hand, hesitating. "Your Honor, I need a 5-minute recess," Rebecca said urgently. "Counselor, I've already denied—" "Your Honor, I have new information that's directly relevant to this case. 5 minutes. Please." Something in her voice, the desperate sincerity, made Morrison pause. He sighed dramatically. "Fine. 5 minutes. But make it quick. Bailiff, escort Mr. Parker to the holding area." Tom gently touched James's elbow. "Sir, if you'll come with me." His voice was respectful, apologetic even. James allowed himself to be led away without resistance. As he passed Rebecca, she whispered quickly, "First Special Forces Group, I'm making a call. Just hold on." James gave the smallest nod. Rebecca practically ran from the courtroom, her phone already to her ear. She'd found a general number for Fort Lewis, the headquarters of First Group. It was a desperate shot, but it was all she had. The phone rang 4 times. She prayed someone would answer. "Fort Lewis Public Affairs. This is Specialist Davis. My name is Rebecca Chen. I'm a public defender in Northwood County. I have a veteran in custody. His name is James Parker. He's wearing a First Group pin and—" "Ma'am, I can't get involved in civilian legal matters," the specialist interrupted, his voice polite but firm. "Please, just listen. The judge doesn't believe his medals are real. He's ordering a psychiatric evaluation. He's being held in contempt for refusing to remove his jacket. Please, his name is James Parker. Can you just check if he's in your system?" There was a long pause. "Spell the last name." "Parker. First name James." She heard rapid typing. Then the typing stopped. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. When Specialist Davis spoke again, his entire tone had changed. "Ma'am—" "What courtroom?" "Courtroom C, Northwood County Courthouse. Do not let him leave that courthouse. Do not let them take him anywhere. We're coming." The line went dead. Rebecca stood frozen in the hallway, her phone still pressed to her ear. The specialist's voice had been urgent, almost panicked. Whatever he'd found in that system, it was significant. She walked back into the courtroom on shaking legs. Judge Morrison was reviewing papers, making notes. Tom Rodriguez stood by the holding room door, his expression troubled. "Well, counselor?" Morrison didn't look up. "Did your 5 minutes produce anything useful?" "Your Honor, I've been in contact with Fort Lewis. They're sending someone." Morrison finally looked up, his expression annoyed. "Sending someone? For what purpose?" "To verify Mr. Parker's service record." The judge laughed. "That's completely unnecessary. This is a traffic court, not a military tribunal. Bailiff, bring the defendant back out. Let's finish this farce." Tom opened the holding room door. James emerged, his bearing unchanged. If anything, he seemed calmer now, almost serene. As James took his place at the defense table, Rebecca leaned close. "Help is coming. I don't know who or when, but they're coming." James looked at her for the first time, with what might have been warmth in his eyes. "Thank you, miss. But it's all right. Either way, it's all right." His acceptance, his complete lack of bitterness or fear, was almost unnerving. Morrison cleared his throat. "Now then, Mr. Parker, for the last time, will you remove that jacket?" "No, Your Honor." "Then I have no choice. I'm finding you in contempt of court. I'm imposing a fine of $500 and ordering immediate psychiatric evaluation. Furthermore—" He never finished the sentence. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom exploded inward. 2 soldiers in dress blues stood at attention on either side of the entrance. They were young, fit, immaculate. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Then a third figure entered. General William Thatcher, 3 stars gleaming on his shoulders, walked down the center aisle. His boots clicked against the floor with the precision of a metronome. Each step commanded attention, demanded respect. He didn't look at the judge. He didn't look at the gallery. His eyes were locked on James Parker. When he reached the defense table, General Thatcher stopped. For a moment that stretched into eternity, the two men simply looked at each other. Then the general snapped to attention with a movement so sharp it seemed to cut the air itself. His right hand came up in the crispest, most perfect salute anyone in that room had ever seen. "Sergeant Major Parker," his voice rang out clear and strong, "it is an honor to be in your presence, sir." The courtroom remained frozen in stunned silence. Judge Morrison's mouth hung open. The gallery leaned forward collectively, trying to comprehend what they were witnessing. Slowly, with the stiffness of age but unmistakable precision, James Parker returned the salute. His gnarled hand came up, fingers aligned perfectly at his temple. For just a moment, 84 years fell away. The decorated soldier he'd once been stood visible in that movement. Only after James lowered his hand did General Thatcher relax his own salute. "Your Honor," the general said, finally acknowledging Morrison's existence. His voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am General William Thatcher, commanding officer of the 1st Special Forces Group at Fort Lewis. I believe there has been a grave misunderstanding here today." Morrison found his voice, though it came out weaker than before. "General, this is highly irregular. I don't know who sent you, but this is a civilian courtroom. Military protocol doesn't. Sergeant Major Parker's service record does." Thatcher cut him off cleanly. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a folder, placing it on the defense table. "Since you've questioned the authenticity of his decorations, allow me to clarify." The general opened the folder and began to read. His voice filled the room like thunder. "James Robert Parker, enlisted United States Army, January 1960. Served with distinction for 28 years. Completed Special Forces training, 1962. Assigned to 5th Special Forces Group, 1st Battalion." With each word, Judge Morrison seemed to shrink. "Deployed to Vietnam, 1965. 3 tours of duty. Member of Military Assistance Command, Vietnam Studies and Observations Group. Operating in classified cross-border reconnaissance missions." Sarah Mitchell, the reporter in the gallery, was recording every word on her phone. "Awards and decorations," the general continued, his voice carrying pride and steel. "Bronze Star with V device for valor. 3 awards. Silver Star, 2 awards. Distinguished Service Cross, Purple Heart, 4 awards." The room was so quiet you could hear breathing. And this. General Thatcher's finger moved to point at the star-shaped medal on James's chest. The Medal of Honor, awarded to then Staff Sergeant Parker for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Morrison's face had gone from red to gray. The general's voice softened slightly, taking on a tone of reverence. On March 14, 1968, near the village of Khe Sanh, Staff Sergeant Parker's reconnaissance team was ambushed by a reinforced enemy company. Despite being outnumbered 10-1, Sergeant Parker single-handedly assaulted 2 fortified machine gun positions, neutralizing both. In his mind, James was no longer in the courtroom. He was back in the jungle, the air thick with humidity and the stench of gunpowder. He could hear the screaming of wounded men, the chatter of AK-47s, the distinctive crack of M16 return fire. He saw Danny Martinez, 19 years old from San Diego, his leg shredded by machine gun fire. He saw Tom Chen, no relation to Rebecca, pinned behind a fallen tree, returning fire with his last magazine. He saw Mike Harrison, the team's medic, desperately trying to stop the bleeding on 3 men at once. Upon neutralizing the enemy positions, General Thatcher continued, Sergeant Parker carried 3 critically wounded soldiers across 200 meters of open terrain under continuous hostile fire to a landing zone for medical evacuation. James remembered the weight of Martinez on his back, the hot, wet feeling of blood soaking through both their uniforms, the burning in his lungs as he ran, zigzagging through mud and gunfire. He remembered setting Martinez down by the LZ, seeing the kid's eyes going unfocused, hearing him whisper, "I can't feel my legs, Sarge." "You don't need to feel them right now, Danny. Just stay with me. Chopper's coming." Then, the general's voice brought James back to the present. Despite his own injuries, he'd been struck by shrapnel in his shoulder and leg. Sergeant Parker returned to the ambush site. Under continuous fire, he provided covering fire for the remainder of his team to withdraw. He'd gone back. Not because of training, not because of orders, because Mike Harrison was still out there. Still trying to save the others, because Tom Chen was down to his sidearm, because leaving them wasn't an option. By the time the rescue helicopters arrived, General Thatcher said quietly, Sergeant Major Parker had been fighting continuously for 4 hours. He'd sustained 3 separate wounds. He refused medical evacuation until every member of his team was safely extracted. The general closed the folder. Of the 12 men in that reconnaissance team, 8 survived because of James Parker's actions that day. 4 of those men are alive today, leading normal lives with children and grandchildren who exist because this man wouldn't leave them behind. General Thatcher turned to face Judge Morrison directly. The temperature in the courtroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. "You called him a fraud, Your Honor. You accused him of stolen valor. You ordered him to remove his jacket like it was a costume." The general's voice was quiet, but it carried more menace than any shout. "Do you have any idea what that medal represents? The blood it cost? The brothers who died earning their place in memory?" Morrison opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. No words came out. His face had gone completely white. "Sergeant Major Parker," the general continued, never breaking eye contact with the judge, "spent 6 months recovering from his wounds. He was offered a medical discharge with full honors. He refused. He completed his rehabilitation and returned to active duty. He served for 20 more years after that day in Khe Sanh." Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face. She didn't bother wiping them away. Tom Rodriguez, the bailiff, stood at perfect attention now. His own military bearing had unconsciously surfaced. He stared at James with undisguised awe. "In those 20 years," Thatcher said, "he trained 3 generations of Special Forces soldiers. He mentored hundreds of young men who went on to serve with distinction. He never spoke about his Medal of Honor, never used it for personal gain, never asked for special treatment." The general's voice hardened. "Because that's what real heroes do. They serve quietly. They carry their honor with dignity, not expectation." The general finally looked away from Morrison, turning back to James. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, filled with emotion. "Sir, I was one of those soldiers you trained. Fort Bragg, 1985. You were the sergeant major for our battalion. You taught me that being a Green Beret wasn't about being the toughest or the most skilled. It was about being willing to sacrifice everything for the man next to you." He paused. "I never forgot that lesson. Neither did any of the men you trained." James smiled slightly. "Billy Thatcher, you were the kid who fell out of the chopper during fast rope training." "Yes, sir," the general said with a slight smile. "Broke my ankle. You carried me to the medic station yourself. You got back up, finished the training. That's what mattered." The exchange was quiet, personal, but it carried across the silent courtroom like a benediction. General Thatcher straightened, his voice returning to its official tone. "Your Honor, I've been in contact with the governor's office, the state attorney general, and the Judicial Oversight Committee. They are all very interested in today's proceedings, particularly interested in how a decorated war hero was treated in a court of law." Morrison seemed to physically deflate. His shoulders sagged, his hands trembled as he gripped the bench. "The traffic citation against Sergeant Major Parker is dismissed," the general stated flatly. "The contempt charge is dismissed. The psychiatric evaluation order is dismissed. Furthermore, I have been authorized by the Secretary of the Army to inform you that any further action taken against this man will result in formal intervention by the United States government." The words hung in the air like a sword about to fall. Sarah Mitchell's phone buzzed. Her editor was texting frantically, having seen her live updates. This story was already going viral. "General Thatcher," James spoke for the first time since the general arrived. His voice was gentle. "That's enough, son." The general looked at him, surprised. "He made a mistake," James continued. "A bad one. But I've made mistakes too. We all have." He looked at Morrison with something approaching compassion. "He didn't know. Can't blame a man for what he doesn't understand." The grace in those words, the absolute lack of vengeance or triumph, was staggering. Morrison stared at James as if seeing him for the first time. The old man in the worn denim jacket wasn't a prop or a fraud or a source of mockery. He was a testament to a kind of courage Morrison had never encountered, would never possess. Morrison's voice cracked. "I apologize, Mr. Parker, Sergeant Major Parker. There's no excuse for how I treated you." James nodded once. Simple acceptance. General Thatcher gestured to the two soldiers at the door. They moved with synchronized precision, flanking James's position. "Sergeant Major, if you'll allow us, we'd like to escort you home." "That's not necessary, Billy." "Sir, with respect, it absolutely is." The general's voice was firm but warm. "Consider it an honor guard. We'd like to give you what you should have received the moment you walked into this courthouse. Respect." James allowed himself to be escorted from the courtroom. General Thatcher walked on his right, one of the young soldiers on his left, the other following behind. As they passed through the gallery, everyone stood. It wasn't coordinated, wasn't planned. It just happened. A courtroom full of strangers rising to their feet in spontaneous respect. Tom Rodriguez saluted as James passed. Tears ran down his face. Rebecca gathered her files with shaking hands. She'd done it. She'd made the call that brought help. But she knew she hadn't saved James Parker. He'd saved himself through decades of quiet dignity, through a life lived with honor. Judge Morrison remained at the bench, alone, watching his career crumble in real time. His phone was already buzzing with calls from the State Judicial Commission. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered. Word had spread quickly. Sarah Mitchell's social media posts had exploded across the internet. Veteran with Medal of Honor humiliated in court. Then a general arrived. General Thatcher's car waited at the curb, but James stopped. "I've got my motorcycle," he said simply. The general smiled. "Then we'll follow you home, sir. Make sure you get there safely." "Billy, I've been getting myself home for 84 years. "Yes, sir. But today you're not doing it alone." The drive to James's modest home took 20 minutes. A military convoy of one motorcycle and 2 Army vehicles. Neighbors came out of their houses, watching in amazement. When they arrived, James's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, elderly, Vietnamese-American, stood on her porch. She saw the uniform, saw the general's stars, saw James. Her hands flew to her mouth. She walked over slowly, saying something in Vietnamese. James responded in the same language, his pronunciation rusty but clear. She began to cry, reaching up to touch the medal on his chest with trembling fingers. "What did she say?" Rebecca asked. She'd followed the convoy in her own car, unable to let the story end. "She asked if the medal was for Vietnam," James said quietly. "Her father was South Vietnamese Army, killed in 1968. She wanted to know if I fought there." "What did you tell her?" "That I was there. That her father was a brave man. That I was honored to fight alongside people like him." Mrs. Chen spoke again, still crying. James translated. "She says thank you for not forgetting, for still carrying it with you." General Thatcher stepped forward. "Sergeant Major, The Army would like to organize a proper recognition ceremony. Fort Lewis, full honors. The media coverage from today means your story is going national. You deserve to be honored publicly. James shook his head. No ceremony, Billy. No press. This jacket... He touched the medals. These aren't for show. They're reminders. For me. Of promises I made. Men I couldn't bring home. Sir, Danny Martinez died on that chopper, 20 minutes after I got him to the LZ. He was 19 years old. James's voice stayed steady, but his eyes held old pain. Tom Chen made it home, but he died in a car accident in 1972. Mike Harrison survived the war, survived 20 years after, then ate his service pistol in his garage. The silence was profound. So no, James continued. No ceremony, no celebration. I wear this jacket because I promised them I'd remember. That's all. General Thatcher stood at attention. Understood, sir. But the Army wants to do something. The community wants to do something. Then do something for the ones still fighting, James said. The young soldiers coming home broken. The ones who can't sleep. The ones who think they failed because they survived. Do something for them. Within a week, the state legislature passed a bill unanimously. The James Parker Veterans Dignity Act required sensitivity training for all public officials regarding military service. It mandated veterans liaisons in every courthouse. It created a hotline for veterans facing discrimination. James didn't attend the signing ceremony. The governor brought the signed bill to his house personally. Judge Morrison resigned. The Judicial Commission had given him the option of forced removal or voluntary resignation. He chose the latter. His legal career was over at 52 years old. 3 weeks after the incident, he showed up at James's door. James opened the door to find Morrison standing on his porch, looking older and smaller than he had on the bench. No expensive suit. Just jeans and a polo shirt. A man stripped of his armor. Sergeant Major? Morrison's voice was quiet. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Face to face. Man to man. James studied him for a long moment. Then he stepped aside. Coffee? They sat at James's kitchen table. Two men divided by a chasm of experience, connected by a moment of terrible truth. I was angry, Morrison said, at everything. My marriage was falling apart. My father had dementia. I was drinking too much. None of that excuses what I did. But I want you to know it wasn't really about you. It was about me. I know, James said simply. How could you know? Because hurt people hurt people. I saw it in the war. Men who'd been broken took it out on others. It's human. Doesn't make it right, but it's human. Morrison looked at the old soldier with something like wonder. After everything I said, everything I tried to do to you, how can you sit here with me? James poured the coffee. Because you came back. Because you're trying to make it right. That takes courage, too. Different kind, maybe, but courage nonetheless. They talked for an hour. When Morrison left, he was crying, but they were different tears than the ones he'd shed in shame. James stood on his porch, watching the man drive away. His neighbor, Mrs. Chen, waved from her garden. Somewhere down the street, children played. The world kept turning. The medals on his jacket caught the afternoon sun. He touched them gently, feeling the weight of memory, the burden of survival, the honor of service. Inside, his phone buzzed with another interview request. He'd ignore it, like all the others. The story wasn't his to tell. It belonged to the ones who didn't come home. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this and unsung American heroes. See you in the next one.